When a confidential document found its way into the hands of an investigative journalist, no one could have guessed it would lead back to Prince Harry himself. Buried within lines of financial jargon was a name and alias tied to a secret offshore account worth millions. The palace scrambled, whispers turned to panic, and the royal silence was finally broken. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It started quietly, an email sent at 2:17 a.m. from an encrypted source to a London newsroom with no subject line and a single PDF attachment. At first glance, it was just another financial file. But within hours, the newsroom buzzed with alarm. A coded transaction log referenced a client with a series of aliases, one of which had been previously used by Prince Harry during discreet charity operations overseas. The alias, long buried in redacted documents, appeared again, this time attached to a series of transfers totaling $12.4 million, moved across 4 jurisdictions over 2 years. As the trail of money led deeper into tax havens and offshore trusts, suspicion turned into confirmation. All roads pointed to one source. And it wasn't just the amount that raised eyebrows, it was the timing. Several deposits matched major media scandals involving Harry and Meghan, while others curiously coincided with explosive royal interviews and legal battles. Within the palace walls, the reaction was one of sheer disbelief. Staffers were blindsided. Senior aides reportedly stood frozen when the story broke, unable to explain how something of this magnitude had gone unnoticed. The Royal Communications Office scrambled for answers, but none came. Within hours, phone lines lit up from global press houses, demanding statements. The phrase "no comment" quickly wore thin. Panic gave way to speculation, and whispers became a storm. How long had the account existed? Who else knew? And more disturbingly, was this part of a long-planned escape strategy from royal control, or something far more sinister? Even seasoned advisors couldn't mask the dread when the king was finally briefed. The meeting happened behind closed doors, deep into the night. Aides present claimed Charles turned deathly pale as the documents were laid before him. He was shown a detailed dossier, compiled by intelligence sources and independent investigators, outlining the flow of cash and its possible political ramifications. This wasn't just a rogue financial decision, it was a potential breach of national dignity. For a monarch already balancing public scrutiny and internal fracture, this revelation struck with the weight of betrayal. For Charles, who had defended his son's right to find freedom across the Atlantic, the discovery of an undeclared financial empire was not just disappointing, it was infuriating. More questions erupted than answers. Was the money linked to the couple's high-profile media deals, or had Harry ventured into alliances far beyond the public eye? Was this the protective fund Diana once hinted at, resurrected in a different form? Or was this Harry taking control in a way that sidestepped every royal protocol? Some insiders began murmuring about foreign influence, quiet favors exchanged, and the implications for the monarchy's global standing. Whatever the origin, one thing was now certain: this wasn't about money anymore. It was about trust, allegiance, and the unspoken war between blood and independence. But the truth behind the account wasn't just financial, it revealed something far more personal and far more dangerous. Speculation erupted over the origin of the funds. Was this a hidden trust from Diana, meant to shield Harry from the crown? Or was it a deeper betrayal, one stretching across borders and alliances? The answer split even the closest royal confidants. Inside palace walls, whispers turned to arguments as long-serving aides clashed over how something so vast, so carefully buried, could have gone unnoticed. Theories flew like daggers. One group insisted this was Diana's doing, a secretive move by a mother who knew her youngest son might one day need protection from the very institution that bore his name. They pointed to a series of personal correspondences Diana had once shared with her private solicitor, moments from the final year of her life, where she hinted at establishing a legacy untouched by royal influence. But that theory began to unravel as other clues emerged, clues that suggested Harry's account may have been constructed well after her death, around the time he severed his official ties with the monarchy. Suddenly, this wasn't about inheritance, it was about independence. Strategic, silent, and potentially explosive. Then came another layer, one that pulled the already fragile threads of trust even tighter. Some advisors, familiar with the labyrinth of international tax shelters, quietly suggested the account's funds had been funneled through projects set up post-Megxit. Book advances, streaming deals, private donations from supporters abroad. If true, Harry and Meghan hadn't just stepped back from the royal fold, they had built a parallel empire, shielded from scrutiny and sovereign oversight. And if these funds had bypassed traditional tax declarations, it wouldn't just be a scandal, it could be criminal. Suddenly, King Charles wasn't just a father trying to comprehend his son's secret. He was a monarch faced with a potential diplomatic disaster. Tensions reached a fever pitch when William was briefed. At first, he reportedly refused to believe the account existed at all. Then, after being shown the documents, his silence was deafening. But what stung most wasn't the money, it was the implication that Harry had concealed everything. For William, it wasn't just betrayal of the crown, it was betrayal of blood. And for Harry, still nursing wounds from years of perceived abandonment, the idea of disclosing such financial plans to a family he no longer trusted seemed unthinkable. Both men stood on opposite sides of the same fire, unsure whether to put it out or let it burn. Meanwhile, advisors urged Charles to act before the story spiraled further. The press was circling. Politicians whispered about accountability. Public sentiment wavered dangerously. Then, in a twist that turned theory into tangible evidence, a series of letters resurfaced handwritten by Diana to a mysterious Swiss financier. The letters, once sealed away in a private archive, suggested she had indeed laid groundwork for secretive financial arrangements abroad. While they didn't name Harry directly, the implications were chillingly clear. The media latched onto the story, and with it came another revelation. Meghan's name, discreetly listed in the founding documents of a Caribbean-based corporation connected to the same financial trail. Questions deepened. Was she the architect, the beneficiary, or just another pawn in a decades-long shadow war? As the press closes in, King Charles decides silence is no longer an option and prepares for a confrontation decades in the making. Inside a private chamber at Clarence House, father and son met not as royals but as adversaries. The tone was cold, the accusations sharp, and for the first time, King Charles demanded an answer from Harry that would change their relationship forever. The call was hastily arranged, and the tone was set long before Harry appeared on screen. No press officers, no intermediaries, just two men bound by blood and torn apart by a storm of secrets. Charles, flanked only by his most trusted private secretary, wasted no time. The moment Harry's image flickered to life, the king's voice cut through, measured but seething. He demanded an explanation, not for the public, not for the press, for the crown, for the institution Harry once swore allegiance to. Harry remained composed, almost rehearsed. He didn't deny the existence of the account. In fact, he admitted it openly. Yes, the account was real. Yes, it was substantial. But no, he would not elaborate on its full purpose. He spoke of protection, of autonomy, of the right to build a life free from scrutiny. But to Charles, it sounded like justification wrapped in rebellion. Reports from those near the scene claimed the king was trembling, not from age, but from fury. A betrayal of this magnitude, hidden finances, offshore shadows, possible legal consequences, was not just reckless. It was dangerous. Camilla, hearing the tension from outside the room, stepped in briefly, only to be told sharply to stay out of it. This was between father and son, between sovereign and dissenter. Harry pushed back, claiming the account was legal, independent, and necessary. But Charles saw something more. He saw the erosion of trust, the dismantling of legacy, and a son slipping deeper into the arms of a world that viewed monarchy not as tradition, but as target. When veiled questions failed, Charles turned to threats. He warned Harry that if cooperation wasn't forthcoming, the royal family would take formal action. An audit. A probe. Every deal, every transfer, every whisper of foreign involvement would be dragged into the light. Harry, tight-lipped and unmoved, simply stared back. He accused his father of caring more for image than truth, of weaponizing legacy for control. And then, without warning, he ended the call. A blank screen replaced his face. Silence fell over Clarence House, heavier than any storm. Charles reportedly sat frozen for several minutes, not in shock, but in calculation. What remained was not sorrow but resolve. This was no longer about reconciliation. This was war, the quiet kind. The kind fought not with swords, but signatures. Not with public statements, but private devastation. And in that silence, a decision was made. But the king wasn't done. What followed was a ruthless move from a monarch pushed to his limit. Within 24 hours, palace accountants were mobilized. Lawyers, investigators, and crisis managers poured into Buckingham Palace. The gloves were off. If Harry wouldn't talk, the monarchy would expose every inch of his post-royal life. King Charles, no longer willing to play the role of patient father, signed an order that authorized a full-scale internal audit, a sweeping, relentless investigation into every financial thread still connected to the royal institution. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a message. The crown would no longer tolerate shadows, and Harry's silence would be answered with an unflinching searchlight. Private auditing firms were brought in under the guise of standard protocol, but their brief was clear. Trace every transaction, uncover every offshore link, follow every wire no matter where it led. The royal accountants started where it hurt most: Harry's exit. From the moment the Duke and Duchess stepped back from their duties, a new world had opened. And now, every deal made in that world would be dissected. Discreet calls were made to European banks in Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. Flags were raised, red alerts issued. What they discovered wasn't illegal, but it was buried, carefully structured, and frighteningly elaborate. Shell companies and layered ownerships cloaked the origin of funds. And then, focus shifted west to California, where Meghan's ventures were thriving under the radar. From production contracts to intellectual property licensing, her entire business framework was suddenly under royal microscope. Silent partnerships, digital monetization models, and foreign investors all found their way into the palace's war room. Even her charitable foundations were reviewed line by line, as suspicion clouded every cause. But the most uncomfortable part of this probe came when eyes turned inward toward former staff. Individuals who had lived in Harry and Meghan's shadow at Frogmore Cottage. Bound by NDAs, they had been silent for years. Until now. With the audit approved by the Crown and legal pressure mounting, some began to speak carefully, cautiously, but with just enough detail to deepen the cracks. One confirmed unusual financial deliveries to the estate. Another referenced high-level meetings with American business figures who'd never been logged officially. Whispers grew louder, and soon, fragments of truth began slipping through the palace walls. In the background, the media machine stirred to life. But instead of reacting, the palace preempted the blow. Strategic leaks, carefully worded, perfectly timed, began making their way into friendly publications. They didn't accuse, but they asked questions. Questions that stirred public doubt. Was Harry hiding wealth from the crown? Had Meghan's business interests ever crossed ethical lines? Was this the true cost of royal freedom? The narrative was being reshaped with precision, and the public, now hungry for answers, was already beginning to turn. Meanwhile, Prince William, long silent, was finally briefed in full. He absorbed the storm behind tightly sealed doors, offering no comment. But his silence wasn't indifference, it was calculation. And then, in an unexpected twist, William broke his silence with a message no one expected. For years, William had defended Harry behind closed doors, in public, and to the press. But this time was different. With a single carefully worded statement, he shattered the illusion of brotherhood, igniting a firestorm in the press. The words were brief, but the message echoed across the globe. Accountability and transparency must apply to all of us, no matter where we stand. It was a sentence wrapped in diplomacy, but beneath its polished surface lay a blade aimed straight at Harry's heart. The statement, released quietly through a senior Kensington Palace aide, was immediately interpreted as a declaration of war. For the first time, William was no longer shielding his younger brother, he was distancing himself. And the timing was no accident. It landed just as the audit reached a boiling point, and whispers of criminal liability reached the edges of royal corridors. The tabloids pounced, branding the rift between the brothers as irreversible. The once favored image of a united front was now a shattered myth, replaced by a feud too large to conceal. Behind palace walls, sources claimed William had urged his father to go even further publicly, legally, and without hesitation. He reportedly argued that sparing Harry from scrutiny would only worsen the monarchy's already fragile reputation. It wasn't about revenge, William insisted. It was about principle. But for Harry, it felt like betrayal, pure and personal. He responded not through the press, but through a message delivered in private. The tone was sharp, wounded, and unfiltered. In it, he accused William of cowardice, of hiding behind vague words while stoking fires from a safe distance. The message was intended to remain confidential, but within hours, it was leaked, line for line, word for word. The world now had a front-row seat to the collapse of one of the most storied bonds in modern royal history. Meghan, sources say, was devastated by the fallout. She had long hoped that despite the public tension, some bridge could still be rebuilt between the brothers. But William's statement and the vicious reaction it provoked shattered that last illusion. The Sussexes retreated from the public eye, issuing no official comment, but their silence only deepened the storm. Every photograph, every appearance or lack thereof was scrutinized. And when Kate failed to appear at a major royal engagement just days later, the speculation intensified. Was she distancing herself from the chaos? Was she privately siding with her husband or quietly trying to keep the family from fracturing further? No one knew, but the absence was louder than words. As the world debated who was right and who was wrong, another revelation was quietly building in the background, one that neither brother saw coming. Because while they were busy fighting each other in the public square, someone within the palace was quietly preparing to ignite a scandal that would make everything before it look like child's play. But what neither brother knew was that someone inside the palace had been keeping receipts, and they were ready to talk. A former royal aide, long dismissed and quietly paid off, steps forward. In a secret interview, they expose a paper trail dating back years complete with hidden wire transfers, secret meetings, and an internal cover-up that went much deeper than Harry. The aide, whose name remains under legal protection, was once a fixture within the Sussex inner circle, trusted, discreet, and privy to everything from sensitive travel arrangements to private financial coordination. For years, they kept silent, bound by a confidentiality agreement signed under the shadow of palace arches. But that silence shattered when they presented journalists with evidence records, not only verifying the existence of the offshore account, but detailing Harry's usage of multiple aliases across separate digital banking platforms. These weren't casual oversights or accidental mislabels. The aliases were deliberate, recurring, and tied directly to wire transfers routed through jurisdictions known for secrecy. Even more damning were the messages. Encrypted, time-stamped, and routed through anonymous relay systems, they referenced coded meeting points, third-party financial handlers, and a growing effort to keep specific transactions from ever reaching the public or royal eye. The turning point came with the revelation of a 2021 meeting in Dubai, one Harry allegedly attended under extraordinary discretion. The aide described the meeting as high-risk and deeply unusual, involving intermediaries with ties to global financial networks known for their opacity. The purpose of the meeting? Unknown. But what followed, according to the records, were significant transfers into the now infamous account spanning 6 countries and routed through 4 shell corporations. The complexity of the setup suggested planning, not spontaneity. Intention, not error. Even more chilling was the claim that the palace had known at least in part. In early 2022, internal memos circulated suggesting concerns over unmonitored financial activity tied to Harry. But instead of confronting it, senior officials allegedly chose silence. Some feared another public rupture. Others hoped the issue would fade in the shadows. But the whistleblowers' documentation told a different story, one of deliberate avoidance, not ignorance. Their evidence included redacted correspondences, overlooked legal briefings, and internal advice from the Royal Security Division urging discretion. But what stunned investigators most wasn't what happened in 2021. It was what happened in 2022, days after Queen Elizabeth's funeral. Amid global mourning and royal transition, a discreet 7-figure payment moved from the account to a private consultancy registered in Panama. The timing raised alarms. The motive remained unknown. But in a moment meant for national unity, someone close to the crown had shifted wealth across oceans under the radar, and without explanation. When the story broke, Buckingham Palace's security infrastructure faltered. The leak bypassed every firewall, reaching media outlets in real time. Royal aides scrambled to contain the breach, but the damage was done. Questions exploded across headlines. Who knew? Who approved? And why had the monarchy allowed itself to be outmaneuvered by one of its own? With the public now aware and the media howling for answers, the Crown had one final card to play, and it was aimed at absolute humiliation. The headlines were unforgiving. But it was the official statement from Buckingham Palace that sent shockwaves through the world. Prince Harry's remaining royal privileges were to be formally revoked. It was exile this time, not by choice. After weeks of mounting tension, clandestine investigations, and growing media pressure, King Charles struck with unflinching finality. The decision was framed as constitutional, procedural, necessary. But beneath the surface, it was personal. The statement, released in the early hours of a Thursday morning, confirmed what many feared and others demanded. Effective immediately, Prince Harry would lose all remaining honorary military titles, royal patronages, and ceremonial appointments. It marked the end of a long and painful unraveling. What had begun as a slow departure had now become a brutal severance. For many within the royal fold, this was the only path forward. For others, it was retribution dressed in protocol. Even more symbolic was the erasure of the Sussex crest from royal archives and official merchandise. Without ceremony, it vanished from palace gift shops, commemorative plaques, and the royal family's digital presence. Staff were quietly instructed to remove or archive anything bearing the emblem. It was a purge, swift and total. And when the press reached out for comment, the palace offered only a cold reaffirmation. The monarchy would always uphold duty, honor, and unity regardless of blood. Behind closed doors, Meghan and Harry were said to be stunned. Their team of attorneys quickly mobilized, exploring what, if any, legal recourse remained. But in the face of royal authority, there was little room to maneuver. They hadn't just lost titles, they had been publicly disowned by an institution that once defined them. Then came the leak. A draft document never meant to be seen emerged from within the palace. In it, advisors had gone even further, urging King Charles to consider revoking the Sussex dukedom altogether. The title, granted upon their wedding, had been a symbolic gesture of unity and grace. Now, it was on the chopping block. Though the final decision spared them that humiliation, at least for the moment, the leak itself was a warning. Nothing was off the table. Every bond could still be broken. Every name rewritten. As the news spread, so did division. Some hailed the move as overdue, an act of courage by a monarch finally asserting control. Others condemned it as heartless, punitive, and cruel. Commentators drew battle lines across airwaves. Was Charles defending the crown or dismantling his family? Was Harry the rebel or the scapegoat? And where did duty end and vengeance begin? As debate raged, neither side blinked. Harry and Meghan remained silent, but the distance between them and the throne had never felt wider. But just when it seemed the war had reached its peak, a new player stepped into the shadows, one who could destroy everything. Behind the secret account was a name no one could have imagined. A billionaire with old ties to the monarchy, one with a grudge and a hidden agenda. Their connection to Harry wasn't just financial, it was personal. It began with a whisper from inside the financial tracing unit. A foreign entity flagged during the audit bore a peculiar signature. One that didn't just scream wealth, but revenge. Within days, investigators had followed the trail to a powerful international figure, a billionaire magnate with a murky history, once warmly welcomed into royal circles, and later quietly exiled after a scandal that nearly brought shame to the Queen's name. At the time, the story was buried under the weight of national dignity. But now, that name was back, and not just in palace files. It was on the deposit line of Harry's offshore account, linked directly to a fund registered in Cyprus and filtered through shell companies from Hong Kong to Qatar. The scale was staggering. The intent, even more so. Private documents uncovered by a joint media task force revealed that Harry had met with this individual multiple times in the aftermath of Megxit. These weren't casual encounters. These were formal sit-downs, off-grid, meticulously unrecorded until now. Locations were tracked, timelines confirmed. Some took place in neutral cities like Lisbon and Vancouver, Others were dangerously close to diplomatic red zones. The nature of the meetings remained speculative, but what was no longer in doubt was the pattern. Harry had been seeking counsel, and perhaps more. In light of what followed, the financial infrastructure, the sudden independence, the explosive memoir deals, the implication was clear. This billionaire had offered more than advice. He had offered backing. But the revelations only deepened the complexity. Was Harry the architect or the pawn? Was he drawn into a dangerous alliance under the illusion of autonomy? Or did he knowingly align himself with someone whose interests directly conflicted with the crown? Voices inside the palace were divided. Some believed Harry had been manipulated, targeted in a moment of emotional fracture by a figure who knew exactly where to strike. Others were less forgiving, suggesting Harry had orchestrated the entire thing to bypass royal oversight and rewrite the rules on his own terms. In either case, the damage was done. What inflamed the scandal further was the shocking admission that King Charles himself had once had private dealings with this same billionaire decades ago, during a controversial land exchange that had since been buried in royal archives. While the matter had been deemed closed at the time, it now resurfaced with venom. Was this about Harry? Or had the entire monarchy been played? The press seized the narrative with unrelenting force, and within hours, the billionaire's name was splashed across global headlines, igniting international backlash and renewed scrutiny into Britain's royal finances. The monarchy, already on the defensive, found itself caught between scandal and silence. And as the truth detonated across the world, Harry made a move that no one, especially his father, was prepared for. Cornered, humiliated, and stripped of his royal remnants, Harry made one final stand. In a globally broadcast interview, he told his version of the truth, and it wasn't just an explanation. It was an all-out war against the very institution that raised him. The announcement came with no warning. A primetime slot on one of America's biggest networks. No teasers, no media tour, just a sudden surge in anticipation, and an image of Harry seated alone, under the weight of everything he'd lost. The world watched with bated breath. And when the camera cut to his face, it wasn't the same prince they remembered. This was a man burning with conviction, grief, and fury. Within minutes, he admitted to the account. He didn't deny the money, the structure, or the secrecy. But he framed it not as betrayal, but as survival. A shield, he called it. A financial firewall built not to deceive, but to protect himself and his family from what he called monarchic abuse. He spoke of control, manipulation, and a culture of fear that thrived behind palace walls. But it was when he turned his words on his father that the world seemed to pause. He accused King Charles of hypocrisy, of waging a campaign of moral superiority while harboring secrets of his own. And then came the bombshell. Screens across the globe lit up with screenshots, private texts exchanged between Harry and senior royals, revealing emotional confrontations, icy dismissals, and desperate pleas. They weren't just messages. They were raw fragments of a family at war with itself. The most shocking thread came on the night of Queen Elizabeth's death, an exchange that suggested Charles had considered disinheriting Harry before the funeral had even concluded. The gasp from the studio audience was audible. The silence from the monarchy, deafening. Midway through the interview, Meghan joined him briefly. Composed, tearful, and fiercely protective, she defended their choices with a quiet, aching sincerity. She spoke of threats, trauma, and the relentless pressure to conform or disappear. "We didn't leave the family," she said. "We left the system that refused to protect us." Her voice cracked. Social media lit up. Some wept, others raged. The reactions were instant and polarizing. Supporters hailed Harry as courageous, a whistleblower tearing through generations of silence. Detractors labeled him ungrateful, selfish, and destructive. Protests erupted outside royal palaces. Celebrities chose sides. Parliament murmured about national image. The world didn't just watch, it fractured. Inside Buckingham Palace, the fallout was immediate. King Charles, already reeling from weeks of scandal, reportedly canceled all public appearances. Royal aides scrambled to draft a response, but no statement came. The crown, for the first time in a century, had been forced into retreat, not by a foreign power, not by a rebellion, but by one of its own. And for the institution that once prided itself on dignity through discretion, It had been stripped bare in front of millions. The monarchy will survive, but its scars may never fade. And for the House of Windsor, the cost of silence has never been higher. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.